Well, death stings. Death stings. I grew up in Southern California, but my mom was from Arizona. She grew up in a small town in eastern Arizona, and it was a classic kind of small town USA, even in the 80s when I was growing up. Well, I grew up a lot in the 70s. I ought to claim it. But anyway, so about once or twice a year, we would go out to Arizona to go to my mom's hometown. She was one of three daughters, and her two sisters stayed in Safford, Arizona. They were both school teachers, and my grandmother also lived there. And so it was really fun for my sister and I to go there. My sister is a few years older than me, and one of my aunts, my Aunt Linda and her husband Saul, had two kids. One was my age, and the other one was the same age as my sister, a boy and a girl. And so we would usually spend a few nights with them, but then we would get kind of, I don't know why, I didn't really question it when I was a kid, but now I kind of wonder, why did we get kicked around so much? But anyway, we would stay a few nights in one home, and then we'd move over to another home. But everybody kind of lived close together within walking distance, and it was just really great to be there. My Aunt Lorna was my mom's younger sister, and she has two children, Owen and Amy, who are quite a bit younger than me. But we spent time with Aunt Lorna also, and her husband David. Aunt Lorna had tremendous faith. She was somebody who, when you met her, you just could tell that she believed in God, just by the way that she carried herself, the way that she spoke, the things that she did not say, the things that she did say. You could tell that she was a follower of Jesus. And so I looked up to Aunt Lorna growing up. When I was in my 20s, I started to really question the existence of God, and I actually began to not go to church, and I wasn't sure that all of this God stuff was real, and I decided that intelligent people could never believe in such fairy tales. I mean, that was kind of the mindset that I had. But I got into a really rough patch in my life when I began to kind of think about, well, who am I, and what is my purpose in life, and what is the meaning of the universe, and why do we exist? Simple questions like that. And so I was wrestling around with those kind of questions, and I began to think about my Aunt Lorna, and I thought, she's a really intelligent person, and she believes in God. Maybe there's something to it. And so I actually decided in my mid-20s to begin to follow Jesus again. And it really started, for me, it started with a conscious decision. It was just like deciding to order a hamburger instead of a chicken sandwich. It wasn't that simple, but it wasn't something that I felt in my heart was right. It was more like I decided in my mind I wanted to believe in, and then my heart kind of followed. I think it kind of works that way. And so I began following Jesus, and at about that same time, my Aunt Lorna was diagnosed with lymphoma. And at that time, it was questionable on whether or not it could be treated. She started doing chemo. She lost all of her hair. She went through all of the rigors of chemotherapy, and really started to do better. We thought she was going to make it. And I remember writing to her a letter telling her how important her faith was to me and how that helped me in my faith. And that was a really important connection that I had with her. But she died. Nobody expected it, but she died. And it was painful. It stung. Here was this person who had such tremendous faith and had so much to offer the world. She was a person that was unashamed of talking about Jesus. She was a strong Christian, and she died. She was only 5 years older than I am right now when she died. And she left behind two young children and a husband who had every plan of their retirement. They had just bought their retirement home. They had all these great plans. She's dead. Death stings. Today is a day that we think back on people that we've lost, And it hurts. It hurts to think about people that we've lost. But it's okay to feel sad today. It is normal and okay to feel sad about people that we've lost. Jesus was with his disciples in Jerusalem, and they were, he was doing his thing. He was always getting in these arguments with religious people. The church at that time wasn't too interested in Jesus. We may have to wonder about it today too. But anyway, he got into all these troubles with the religious people. And thanks for laughing, Jimmy, because that was intended to be a little dry joke. But anyway, he got into trouble, and these people he got into this argument because he had said something that to them they considered to be blasphemy. And so because it was blasphemous, they began to pick up stones off the ground, and they were getting ready to throw rocks at him and kill him. But somehow Jesus escaped. He slipped out of the crowd, and he and his disciples left Jerusalem, and they walked down past the Jordan River, and they were sort of like hiding out down there. They're kind of hanging out. Jesus had this ability to slip out of dangerous situations. The timing of his death was of his own accord. We believe that. So anyway, he's hiding out in this area, and he and his disciples get word that one of their really close friends, Lazarus, is sick. And Mary and Martha, Lazarus's two sisters, send to Jesus this word saying, "Hey, Lazarus is sick." And so what does Jesus do? Does he get up and just go back because Bethany is where Lazarus was from. Bethany is right next to Jerusalem, which is where he just escaped danger. Does he get up and go back to Bethany? No. He stays there for 2 days. And then he decides, okay, let's go to Bethany. His disciples are like, wait a second, are you sure you want to go back there? Because we just narrowly escaped danger, and you want to go back to that dangerous place? And Jesus said to them, I have to fulfill my purpose for what I'm here to do. And the Gospel of John describes Jesus as being the light of the world. He was the light that came into the world. He came to extinguish the darkness. He came to push the darkness back. And so he says to his disciples when they're questioning whether they should go back to Bethany because it's so close to Jerusalem and people there wanted to kill them, he says to them, there are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there is danger of stumbling because they have no light. And so what Jesus wants to do is he wants to bring light to a dark situation. He wants to bring light to the people that are in Bethany who are grieving Lazarus. Because when Jesus gets there, Lazarus is dead. So he and his disciples do go to Bethany. When they get there, Lazarus has died. And Lazarus' sisters are not too pleased with Jesus for delaying and not getting there in time. And they ask Jesus, they say to Jesus, if you would have come earlier, he would not have died. You could have saved him. So they say, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. And underlying that statement, I think there is a question. And the question that is underlying that statement is, why? Why did you wait? Why did Lazarus have to die? And we have that same question, don't we? In the midst of death, when we experience the loss of a loved one, don't we want to ask why? Why? Why did Lorna have to die at the age of 49? Why are there so many school shootings these days? Why is there this crazy outfit called ISIS just hell-bent on destroying people? Why? I mean, don't you want to know why? Yesterday morning, early in the morning, I don't know if you noticed there was quite a bit of rain, And there was, and I don't know if you had it on your phone, but my phone just kept going, and I'd look and, oh, tragedy, great, and well, a couple of blocks away from our house, there was a path of destruction. Apparently, I mean, it looks to me like a tornado kind of touched down and buzzed through, because there was like a 2 or 3 house wide path. And I mean, it was just incredible to see this. And I was curious about it. So Scott and I drove over there and kind of looked at it. And Scott asked me the question, why does this kind of stuff happen? Why does God let this kind of stuff happen? Why does he have tornadoes? And, we can come up with all kinds of things to say about that. We could talk about, well, flooding is good. It kind of cleanses the earth, and it's good to kind of cleanse through. And, we've had a lot of cleansing recently. We could talk about how earthquakes are really just an aspect of plate tectonics. If you took geology, the plates of the earth is composed of these plates that when they move, there's an earthquake. And that really might be because over a billion-year period, the earth gets renewed, and it's good for the earth to be renewed. Wind can knock down trees, and the trees can decompose into the soil, which helps the soil to remain rich. Wildfires can get rid of, there might be reasons for there being natural disasters in the world. But to answer Scott's question, why, I can't answer it, because I simply don't know. And a couple weeks ago, I got a little bit of insight on how we might think about this. Amy and I went to South Africa, as I mentioned earlier, and 2 Sundays ago, we heard a sermon by a guy named Reverend Vusi Vilakati. And he was preaching on Job. You guys know the story of Job? The story of Job is that Job was this guy who lost everything. Everything was taken from him. His whole family, all of his wealth, everything gone. And that happens right at the very beginning of the story. And then you have a lot of chapters of conversation. And Job is asking one basic question over and over in a variety of ways, and that question is why? And his friends come to him and they start trying to give him answers for why, and they tell him things that maybe you and I have heard when people have tried to supply the answer to why. They asked him, well, Job, maybe you sinned, and this is your punishment. But that proved not to be true because Job was considered to be totally righteous. Or Job, maybe God was trying to teach you something. I mean, that's another lousy response. Hey, maybe this is so you'll learn something. Well, that doesn't really hold water either, because the way that God teaches is, the way we see Jesus teaching is not by destroying things. We see him teaching with actions of love and mercy. We don't see him destroying things, except for that one poor little fig tree. But anyway, but Job's friends say, well, maybe God wants you to learn something. But they just go, why? They're just kind of struggling with this question, why, for 37 chapters. But then in the beginning of chapter 38, God finally speaks. And what God does is he shifts the question from why to who. He says, who are you? And who am I? That's what we need to be thinking about. Not the why question will never be satisfactorily answered, but the who question we know. And when Jesus comes to Bethany and he's greeted by them, and their basic question seems to be why. If you had been here, this wouldn't have happened, which kind of means like, why didn't you show up earlier? What does Jesus say? He says, I am the resurrection and I am life. That's who Jesus is. I am the resurrection and I am life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. That's who Jesus is. Jesus is moved by what he sees, because he sees the people they're crying, they're weeping, they are so, death has really stung them, and they are weeping the loss of Lazarus. And Jesus sees this, and it tells us that he sees Martha weeping, and he sees the other people wailing with her, and it says a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. There's just this kind of gut reaction that he feels. This, have you ever had that where there's just this, it comes up from your guts, and just, he's moved by their grief. And then it says that he asks, "Where have you put him?" And they say, "Lord, come and see." And then Jesus wept. And when he weeps, the verb here does not indicate that he was just, like one lonely little tear that just gracefully dripped off his chin. He's like wailing out loud. He's bawling his head off. He is like screaming at the top of his lungs. He is in grief. And when you and I are grieving, who is it that comes alongside us? It is the one who weeps with us. When you and I are grieving over people that we've lost, when we are grieving over the loss of a marriage or the loss of a dream or the loss of anything in our life, Jesus does not stand in judgment. Jesus weeps with us. When we weep, Jesus weeps. The question that we need to ask ourselves when we are grieving is not why, but is who. And the who is Jesus. He weeps with us. But not only that, he says, "I am the resurrection and I am life." And he acts in our life. He says, roll the stone to the side when they get to the tomb. And they protest. They say he's been dead for 4 days, which means that in those days, the death certificate could not be signed until a person had been dead for 3 days. So for good measure, he's like really, really dead, 4 days. They protest because the smell would be really bad, but Jesus doesn't care about smells. Jesus cares about people. And so he says, roll the stone away. He says, "Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe?" So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and he prayed. And then after praying, he shouts, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus comes out of the tomb, all wrapped up in these grave clothes that they would have wrapped his body in. And he comes walking out of the tomb. And Jesus says, "Unbind him and let him go." Death stings. But when we remember who it is that weeps with us, when we remember that he is the resurrection and he is life, when we remember that he wants to unbind us even as we grieve, there's good news there, isn't it? In the end of all things, we believe that all will be made well. When we look in Revelation, in chapter 21, my bookmark went down to the ground there, but I can find it. In Revelation 21, there's this vision of what the end of all things looks like. It says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, and the sea was also gone. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, 'Look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever.'" That's what God does for us. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and I am life. And if you believe in me, you will not die, but you will have life forevermore." And today is a day that we remember those we've lost, but it's also a day that we celebrate who they are in Jesus Christ. And it's a day for us to remember that as we believe, we will also join them. We will also join them in that eternal home where there is no more there are no more tears. There is no more mourning. There is no more pain. Death stings. 1 Corinthians 15:55 says this, O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? For sin is the sting that results in death, and the law gives sin its power. But thank God, he gives us victory over sin and death through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.